I died on a Thursday, if I recall correctly. I could easily blame it on the weather, but it was a nice sunny day, not too bright, not too cold, and I just wasn't paying attention. I just had to see who texted me. A telemarketing text. When I looked up, I was already into oncoming traffic. The last thing I remember seeing with my physical eyes was the word Freightliner. I heard a squeal of rubber on asphalt, and then the flash. I opened my eyes to see nothing but pavement. I stood up, dusted myself off, and turned back to witness a grisly scene. The entire front of my car was compacted, crushed by the massive frame of the semi that I collided with. I surveyed the damage, and I still shudder to this day when I saw myself. I was barely recognizable, blood everywhere, bones protruding through skin, limbs mangled. I felt like I was going to throw up, but then I heard a voice behind me. I knew exactly who it was.
Michael Aaron Kozlowski?
The voice was deep, but not intimidating. Not as fearful as I had imagined all these years and from all the movies I had seen. I turned around to see him. There was no robe, no scythe, just a skeleton in a plain black suit and overcoat studying a clipboard and checking his pocket watch. He looked up at me.
Mr. Kozlowski, am I correct?
The vacuous sockets of his skull had the expression of weariness and employee burnout. Yeah, that's me, I responded.
Good. For a moment I thought I got lost on the way. You'd be surprised how many Michael Kozlowskis there are in the world.
He was very matter-of-fact, not this hulking, foreboding figure that I was expecting. My curiosity got the better of me. I walked from the wreckage and approached him. Wait a minute. If you're death, then where's all the... I lost my words for a moment, but he was happy to assist.
The robe and sickle?
As he chuckled, his bones rattled under the suit.
Can I call you Mike?
Sure, that's what everyone else called me.
Mike, name one person you know, aside from religious folk, that wear robes nowadays.
You got a point. So, I lost my words again, but I was quick to find them. So, how does this work?
How does what work?
You know, the whole death thing.
Oh!
He chuckled again.
Almost forgot to do my job again.
He quickly switched his focus back to his clipboard and flipped through several papers.
Ah, here we are. Michael Aaron Kozlowski.
He trailed off in an indiscernible mumble for a moment, and then rose back to audible clarity.
Age 41.
I watched as his bony finger traced the information on the page, from line to line and section to section.
Died July 27th, 2000.
I knew what day it was, but I guess he had to go through all the particulars as part of his duty.
Sudden fracture of the skull, succumbed to multiple internal injuries, hemorrhaging, blunt trauma, collapsed lung. Damn! That's a nasty one, wasn't it?
I grimly nodded, trying to be as patient as possible.
Survived by Catherine Avery, wife, and Jacob Thomas, son.
Oh, shit! He stopped the read-through of his documentation and looked up at me.
Excuse me?
I completely forgot about Katie and Jake.
Well, you've been through quite a lot in the past 3 weeks.
Well, I know, but... Wait a minute. 3 weeks?
Yeah, general processing and admittance takes about 4 to 6 weeks. We've been standing here for 3.
But...
Yeah, I know, only seemed like a few hours.
I was going to say minutes, but... Really? 3 weeks? He held up his pocket watch, pressed a tiny button on the side which allowed the cover to swing open and reveal the beautiful antique face. The face seemed to be normal, except there were many more numbers than the standard 12.
Time moves much slower in the afterlife, Mike.
How many
42.
Are you serious? I smirked, as if he were playing a joke on me.
Douglas Adams had it right,
he said as he closed the watch back up and returned it to his left breast pocket.
Now, where were we?
I was remembering my wife and son.
Oh yeah, what about them?
Well, if I figure it correctly, I'm a ghost now, right?
Technically, but...
He turned up his clipboard to show me the lavender sheet of paper with his orders on it.
I've got orders. Says here that,
He trailed off again, running through the items in another section of the paperwork.
You've been pretty much a good egg. Helped others when they needed it. Diligent worker, loving husband and father. You're getting your wings, Mike.
Wait, I'm gonna be an angel?
What?
He snorted out a laugh. I didn't even know a skeleton could snort.
No, that's just a phrase we use to say you're going upstairs and not, well, you know.
Well, that's a relief, but...
But what?
Well, do I have to go now?
Mike, where else you gonna go?
Well, I'd like to say goodbye if I can.
Sorry, that's against the rules.
Eternity has rules?
Well, they're more of guidelines than rules. You don't want to get yourself tangled back up into the world of the living. It'll only lead to anguish, Mike.
What do you mean? He motioned for me to follow him. We began to walk down the road where the accident originally occurred. As I looked around, I noticed that the accident had been completely cleared away and we were walking through streaks of red and white as we crossed the freeway. He put his hands behind his back and looked out towards the horizon.
Mike,
he sighed.
When I died back in... oh, when was it? I can't even remember. I was confused and disoriented just like you were. The Reaper that gave me his spiel was a lot less personable. You know, that whole black robe and all that jazz, like you thought. I was in my mid-20s and I was killed in battle. Riddled with arrows, actually. And my first thoughts were of my bride back in our village. Since the Reaper wasn't as friendly, he just said, "No, it is forbidden." To which I said, "Fuck that," and I took off. I ran for eons to get back to my village, but when I finally got there, I didn't take into account the time change. Time moves differently here, and instead of a couple days for me to return, it was a couple decades. My wife had already remarried and had a new family of her own. I was devastated.
I stood there, enamored by his tale.
Trust me, by the time you get back to your family, they'll have moved on and many years will have passed. If you truly love them, just wait a little longer. They'll come around.
Whatever happened to your bride? She had to have died. Did you two ever meet back up?
We're not here to talk about me, Mike. This is your time.
With that, he took a small device out of his right-hand coat pocket. It resembled a Game Boy with its green screen and a couple of red buttons on the console. He slid his clipboard under his arm and then typed in a few commands that were answered with a series of heavenly chimes and tones. From above, a single ray of light bore down upon the two of us. He looked at me and smiled a skeletal grin.
Going up?
The light got brighter and brighter until I was forced to close my eyes. I was curious to see what was waiting for me there on the other side. I was excited to see all those who passed before me, but I just couldn't get over the fact that I wouldn't see my own funeral. I couldn't get out of my mind that I would miss all of Jake's milestone moments. He just started kindergarten, so I would miss teaching him how to ride a bike, helping him with his homework, teaching him how to drive, sending him off onto his first date, watching him graduate high school and college, being there for his wedding, never meeting my grandkids. At that moment, I dove out of the beam of light and back onto the freeway. The red and white streaks flew past me, forwards and back, disorienting me and causing me to tumble over the guardrail and plummet the 100 feet below under the overpass. I landed with a deadening thud. My vision was blurry and the ringing in my ears slowly ceased. I could see him look over the edge down at me. What was just incoherent sounds soon transformed to his voice bellowing down to me.
Hey, Mike! Are you alright?
Now was my chance. I was far enough away from him that I could make a break for it. I calmly stood up, dusted myself off, and looked up to see him looking down at me, leaning over the guardrail. How do I get back up? I cupped my hands around my mouth and yelled back up.
Don't worry, I'll come down to you,
he answered. In a flash of white smoke, he was gone. I took this opportunity to run like hell. I scurried away from where I was and headed in the direction where I used to live. I darted through the trees and bushes that were underneath the freeway, frantically trying to make my way back home. I ran for about a minute before he appeared through that same puff of white smoke and towered over me. I ran full force into his body and bounced back about 6 feet and landed on my ass.
What the hell do you think you're doing, man?
He scolded.
Didn't you hear what I told you? By the time you get back to your house, everyone will have moved on. You'll be heartbroken because they will have all moved on without you.
I don't believe that for a second, I shouted back. I loved my family with all my heart, and they loved me. I refuse to believe that I will ever leave their thoughts.
Mike, I'm telling you, just wait and they'll...
No, I can't wait. I need to... A lump the size of Montana rose up into my throat, and I was left speechless for a moment. I swallowed it back down, and with it, my eyes began to well up and overflow. I looked down at my shoes. I just now noticed that even though I had been running through the dirt and mud, they were still spotless as the day I had bought them. Did you ever have kids? I asked him.
What?
He was puzzled. I did my best to compose myself, but I couldn't stop thinking about Jake. The tears were now running down my cheeks. When you were alive, did you ever have kids? I think he finally knew where I was going with this line of questioning.
No,
he sighed.
I died before we were able to try.
Then you have no idea the kind of pain I'm going through right now. There are certain things that a father needs to do with his son so that he grows up right. I needed to be there for him, and now I won't be able to. I was robbed of that chance to make sure that I could raise him to be the man he needed to be. I was robbed to experiencing his successes, his failures, his joy, and his sorrow. I can't be there for him, and you just want me to wait? He stood there, silent. Fuck you. Fuck your guidelines. Fuck this bullshit that they just move on. My son meant so much to me, and I'm just supposed to say, oh well, shit happens? He'll be fine? No! I refuse to accept that! He nodded his head for a moment, took a deep breath, and looked back at me, sternly. I know I can't reverse time. I know I just can't come back to life. This I can accept. I just want to say goodbye, and that I'm sorry I'm not going to be able to be there for him. Sorry for everything I'm going to miss. He brought his bony hand to the bridge of his nose and rubbed, looked down again, and sighed.
You just don't get it, Mike.
He looked back up at me.
But you're not the first. Some people just accept death and go with the flow. Others, like you, rebel from square one.
He took the device out again.
Give me 1 second.
A series of chimes and beeps emanated from the device as he pressed some buttons and waited for a response.
Okay, Mike. I can respect the fact that you want to see your son. That you at least want to tell him goodbye. And I know I'm not going to be able to change your mind about this. So, I've requested from the boys upstairs that you are granted a temporary free pass just to see this thing out.
I wiped the tears away from my eyes at the news that I was going to be able to see my son.
There's just a few conditions. First, I have to go with you. I've been assigned to your case, so I have to make sure you don't go all poltergeist on me. That goes on my permanent record, and I'm not having that. Second, as soon as you say what you need to say to Jake, was it?
He double-checked his clipboard.
I make the call and we head upstairs immediately. Do you understand?
I giddily nodded my head and reached out to shake his hand. He immediately pulled it away and held it up to stop me from getting any closer.
Whoa. Don't shake my hand just yet, Mike. You're the one that wanted this, and you may not be happy with what you see.
He turned away from me and pressed a button on the device. As it began to whir and beep, he checked his clipboard once more. The device gave a tiny ding, and he studied the screen.
Okay. Your old house is roughly 5 miles south-southwest of our current location. I suggest we get back up on the freeway and walk from there. It'll be much easier on flat ground, okay?
I nodded and looked around. I had been running around so fast that I completely lost track of where the freeway was. He pointed a skeletal finger to our right, and I headed in that direction. I started to smile. I was going to see my Jake again. We were walking for about 3 miles amongst the red and white streaks along our sides when I finally decided to look up at the sky. It was night, and the stars shone so vividly I could easily see the Milky Way band across the deep indigo sea. I stopped walking. He continued. "Hey, wait a minute," I beckoned. He finally stopped and turned around.
What?
He mumbled. "Okay, explain this to me. The streaks to our left and right are obviously the cars passing back and forth along the freeway, going at their normal speed, but to us, time is moving so fast that they just appear as these streaks, right?"
What are you getting at, Mike?
"What's the deal with the sky?
What deal?
Why isn't the sky and the sun and the moon moving at their same speed? Shouldn't it be a light, dark, really fast, just like everything else?"
If I remember correctly, it has to do with the speed of light. You see, since we're moving so fast through time, the sun isn't up long enough for it to hit your eyes, so it's always night. For the same reason, you'll never see the moon in the sky either.
He was right. It was all just stars and clusters and nebula. Wait a minute.
What is it now, Mike?
How fast are we going?
That conversation we just had?
Yeah?
3 months.
3 months? We'd been walking a couple hours, and that conversation just took a minute or two. I didn't like where this was going, but I had to see this through. I think he started to sense that I was finally starting to see things his way. About after 4 or 5 hours, we finally reached my old house. It was still there. The paint was different, and there was a few different cars in the driveway, but the house still stood. I ran for the front door, but he stopped me, held me by the arm.
Hold on there, Mike. Did you forget about the time difference?
What about it?
Well, if they're going at the speed I told you about, how are you going to be able to sit down and say goodbye to your son?
I contemplated the situation and turned to him with an expression of worry.
Don't worry. I can slow things down a bit, but I can't do it for long. Just long enough for you to get your goodbyes in, and then we're off, okay?
I waited for him to bring out his device once more, press a couple of buttons, and then I felt and heard time slow down. It is one of the most unusual events a human being can ever experience. Imagine you are in the center of a record player, spinning at 77 RPMs, and suddenly, someone puts their finger on the record and slows it down. The world simply lurched to a slower pace. The sound was equally disturbing. A soft, high-pitched whir suddenly increased in volume and choked back in pitch until it was a low hum. A familiar hum. The hum of life. I could hear the wind, the traffic, the normal sounds of my old neighborhood. I was back, and it was a glorious sound to behold.
All right, now you can go in.
He let go of my arm, and I ran to the house. I thought about knocking, but I almost forgot. I was dead, so I just walked through the door. The house was different. It was mostly the same furniture, but there were some things that were askew. The family portraits that used to be on the far wall that connected the living room to the kitchen. The kitchen table used to be rotated 90 degrees. Little things. The other strange thing was that all the lights were on, but there were no people. Why would Katie leave all the lights on if no one was going to be home? I began to walk around the house. I slowly walked down the hall to where the bedrooms were. First, on the left was Jake's. The door was open, so I didn't need to pass through to peer in. The room was empty. Even the carpeting was gone. It looked like no one had used that room in years. A knot was beginning to form in the pit of my stomach. Something wasn't right. I continued down the hall, and to the right was our old bedroom. The decor was certainly more modern than how I remember it. The walls were a different color. As I panned across the room, my eyes finally reached the bed. Under the covers lay an old man, tucked in tight and looking like he was on his last legs. What the shit? Who the hell was this guy? And then I thought, Katie may have remarried and time had passed. This may be her new husband. I looked around the room for more clues. I didn't see any pictures of Katie and me, or Katie and her new husband, so the identity of this man was still a mystery. His breathing became more forced, and he began to cough. Whoever this guy was, his time was almost up. Suddenly, I heard a clatter coming from the hallway. I turned to look as a group of people slowly walked down the hall into the room surrounding the bed. I looked at all of the people and, surprisingly, didn't recognize a single one. "Hey!" I shouted out. I turned around and he was right behind me, holding his device up and reading its display.
Yeah?
He said, still studying the screen of the device, the glow lighting up his skull. "What is this? Who are all these people?"
This is your family, Mike.
What? I turned back and looked. I looked very hard at all of them. This is not my family. I don't recognize any of these people.
Think of the time, Mike.
Think of the time? What the hell does that mean? Then, I heard one of the children speak. They had approached the old man in the bed and held his hand. Tears began to roll down their cheeks as they could barely get the words out. As the words left the child's mouth, that knot in my stomach forced its way up into my throat, and I immediately began to sob giant tears of regret. "Goodbye, Grandpa Jake." The old man turned his head to the child, and I could finally see his face clearly. The eyes, the mouth, the one crooked eyebrow. It was my Jake, all grown up and now at the end of his life. He was able to do it all without me. I looked around the room again and studied all of the photos. There were pictures of him with his wife and his kids. I saw the progression of them grow up and Jake grow older. I saw a photograph of him much younger than he is now, sitting with an older woman. I looked closer. Katie. He was sitting with his mother. Her hands were clasped together on her lap, and her left hand on top, wedding band absent. After all these years, she never remarried. I continued to look at the photos and saw all the experiences that I had missed. I missed it all, I mumbled to myself. He came up behind me and put a hand on my shoulder.
I tried to tell you, but you were too stubborn. I figured you had to learn for yourself. As soon as you get whisked away, we have a constant connection back down here. You could have watched it all, been there every step of the way. All you had to do was wait.
The tears were uncontrollably running down my face now. What do you mean, wait? How long would have I had to wait?
5 minutes. Tops.
5 minutes?
I had to find out the hard way too, Mike.
Suddenly, Jake gasped. His eyes rolled back into his head and the color faded from his face. A loud sound blared from the device and he took notice of it. He pressed a few buttons and then put it back into his pocket.
Well, looks like I have to take the both of you.
What? I spun around. It started low, but a wind began to blow inside the house. I couldn't feel it, but I could definitely hear it. It grew louder and louder until it was as boisterous and roaring as a tornado. I plugged my ears and waited for it to pass. I was facing him at the time, and he pointed behind me and slowly spun me around as the winds blew. Jake began to glow, and as the wind blew more fierce, the light grew brighter. It grew so bright that I was forced to cover my eyes, and the light penetrated my eyelids, so I was forced to turn back around. The wind died, and the light diminished. I opened my eyes and uncovered my ears. The people surrounding the bed were all crying, but Jake, old Jake, stood in front of the bed looking at all the people. After looking upon all of his family members that he would be leaving behind, he turned towards me and him. He instantly recognized him and knew what was to follow.
Jacob Thomas Kozlowski?
He said in the same tone in which he uttered my name to me. Jake nodded.
You know who I am, right?
He asked the old man. Jake nodded slowly. Jake's attention soon turned from the tall skeleton in the suit and overcoat to me. He looked at me and concentrated, studying every feature of my face. I couldn't look away. It was the first time I saw my son's face since I died. I did my best to compose myself, but it's not easy when you've been waiting to see someone just one more time.
Well, because of this guy,
he gave me a friendly shove.
I will be taking both of you upstairs. You've had a good life, Jake. Both of you have. Come on now. Catherine is waiting.
Both of us turned our focus to him. Katie? I blurted out, and at the same time, Mom? The old man stuttered. It was at that moment when it clicked for Jake. I slowly looked back at him, and he returned my gaze. Tears began to well up in his eyes, his lip began to tremble, and magically, the years started to melt away. Soon, I was looking at the man Jake grew to be. And that's when he said it. The one thing I missed from the moment this journey began. Dad?